A major surge in early voting in the Lone Star State is giving Democrats new hope tonight that they could turn the traditionally red state blue next week.
For decades, Texas has been considered a red state, but Democrats are hopeful this election could be different.
New polling estimates President Trump and Joe Biden are tied in Texas.
This was a cycle in which Democrats believed it was their best chance to make real inroads, taking the state from red to purple or even to outright blue. And unfortunately for the Democrats, but probably not all that surprising, it turned out to be a great big nothing. I think the first thing to say is that we have always assumed a higher turnout election is bad for the party in power, whatever party that was. This was a pretty high turnout election, approaching 11 million people, and the assumption was that was going to benefit the Democrats. First thing we learned is that high turnout elections don't necessarily benefit the challengers, because Republicans turned out in great numbers. Second thing is, we know that rural Texas has a tendency to save the bacon of Republicans running statewide. The non-urban counties, particularly the rural counties, really came through and helped Donald Trump at the presidential level and John Cornyn at the U.S. Senate race and a bunch of other people down ballot. Related to that is the fact that the Valley counties along the Texas-Mexico border, heavily Hispanic, which had gone significantly for Hillary Clinton, for Barack Obama in the previous 3 presidential elections, actually significantly underperformed for Joe Biden, which is a part of an overall narrative on election night that possibly the Biden campaign did not do enough outreach to the Hispanic community. You know, those are 3 things off the bat. I think the suburbs did well for Democrats generally, although, you know, at the Texas House level, where we were talking about the possibility of a majority for the Democrats, suburbs didn't deliver.
Really, for the past year and a half, there's just been this expectation setting game, mainly from Texas Democrats, that they were going to flip the Texas House for the first time in nearly 2 decades. And so going into election night, I think there was a pretty, uneasy feeling on both sides. You know, this was the first election without the option to have a one-punch straight ticket voting option on your ballot. And when you get down to these state house races, especially if you're living in Harris County or Dallas County, nobody really knew how that was going to impact these races. And then, within a couple of hours of the polls closing, Republicans were starting to publicly say that they felt really good about their chances. So, when all was said and done, I think Democrats and Republicans pretty much held even on their own sides of the aisle. I think we're going to have about the same sort of breakdown. And we're talking about an 8, 9, 10 seat margin. Republicans have that kind of control heading into a really important once-in-a-decade redistricting process, where they're going to a completely and totally, for sure now, Republican-led process for redrawing the state's political maps. There was a really good possibility heading into this that we were going to have a really narrow margin in the House, which would have, the chamber would in some ways become a more moderate body. So those dynamics really aren't at play right now.
And I am thrilled to be here, deep in the heart of Texas.
When Donald Trump's on the ballot, Republicans turn out, and especially rural Republicans. When he's not, Democrats tend to outperform history. And so we have some open questions going into the future, but it's not a great night for Texas Democrats. What happened in a lot of these districts, particularly ones like Texas 23 and Texas 21, I think it's just one of those things that the suburbs and the urban areas are going toward the Democratic Party, but those very sharply turn into rural areas, and the rural vote came out for Donald Trump. Texas is headed on a trajectory to be increasingly polarized between the cities and the rural areas.
Good evening, and what a night.
I think Cornyn took it seriously, and Hager did not run the retail politicking. That's the biggest difference between her and Beto O'Rourke, was that O'Rourke visited every county, and maybe that wasn't doable in the middle of a pandemic.
I'm Wendy Davis, and I've connected with so many of you.
A lot of these Democratic candidates raised a ton of money and were able to run direct mail campaigns, television advertising, but they weren't out and about because they were trying to set the standard of social distancing. It may have hurt them, but we just don't. I don't know if we'll ever be able to quantify that. There's going to be a hangover, possibly, for the Texas Democratic sphere. It's going to be really hard to convince people going forward that things are as bright in Texas as they seemed in 2018.
It's not purple, it's not blue, it's conservative, it's red. This is a red state, full stop. Every couple of years, Democrats tell people in the press like you and me and people out in the world, we're going to do it this time, but we're all going to be dead before this happens. At some point, they got to put points on the board. I think sometimes the simplest answer is the right answer. And in this case, I just think Texas is still a red state. See you in 2 years.